Hello, and welcome to the Friday Feature Artist Podcast, where we connect you with the hearts and minds of some of the most inspiring artists working today. I'm Angela Truscott, founder of Take Two, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I also extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander listeners joining us today. Enjoying these conversations? Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you feel moved, leave us a review so we can keep sharing these stories far and wide. Today's special guest is Nathan Terborg, an abstract artist from Minneapolis whose gritty, raw, and deeply human work explores curiosity, scars, and transformation. Through a process of collecting, scavenging, and repurposing discarded materials, Nathan creates pieces that invite us to investigate, to lean in, to look closer, and to consider what might be hidden, overlooked, or waiting to be discovered. In this episode, you'll discover how to let go of the outcome, throw caution to the wind, and embrace experimentation, even when it feels uncomfortable. If you're someone who saves that special piece of material just for the right moment, or holds on to an idea waiting for it to be perfect before you begin, this is the episode for you. Nathan's story will remind you of the beauty in the discarded, the power of scars, and the freedom that comes from creating fearlessly. He's exhibited across the US and Europe, co-hosts the Just Make Art podcast with Ty Nathan Clark, and brings to his work a philosophy that sees scars as superpowers and mistakes as part of the path. Please help me in welcoming Nathan Terborg. Nathan, welcome.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
I'm thinking of starting like a little catchphrase. You know how like famous podcasters and stuff, they have like that little catchphrase at the beginning. Sure. And they go, I'm thinking mine might be g'day, g'day.
I love that. I love that. I will say, so one of my best friends lives in Australia. He grew up in the States here, but he took to calling everybody mate. And I've tried to just steal that because it's one of my favorite. It's way better than, you know, dude or bro or whatever else, friend, hey, pal, you know what, there's nothing better than mate. So I've appropriated that.
Go for it. Cool. Okay. Well, g'day, Nathan.
Happy to be here.
I'm going to start with a really easy question. What do we need to know about your past to understand the artist you are today?
Well, we're just jumping right in the deep end. I love it. Let's see. Yeah. You know, God, there's a few ways I want to answer that. I think, you know, let me begin with saying this. I think that to me, the story comes second. And what I mean by that is for the work that I aspire to create, should not require explanation or narrative. I think that when I'm absorbing and enjoying the work of other great artists, I always try to spend time with it before I go, if I'm in a, you know, gallery or museum, before I go and read the plaque, before I read the explanation, if it's of course, you know, work by an artist that I'm not already familiar with, I want to experience it without any context, without any explanation. One of my favorite artists, one of my many art heroes is Louise Bourgeois. And she said, one of my favorite quotes by her is, if I have to explain it, then I have failed. I'm paraphrasing here, but a great work of art does not need to be explained. You know, if it doesn't touch you, if it doesn't move you, then I have failed. That's the end of me paraphrasing Louise, you know, but that's really my belief, and something that I try to apply to my work is, I think the story, and we'll talk about it. I'm happy to answer the actual question, but I felt compelled to give some context for, you know, my whole, I guess, whatever belief or thought process around that. So having shared all that, if my work is successful, the story, you know, shouldn't be necessary to explain it. I think that any backstory, any narrative behind it, hopefully enhances the experience of viewing the work itself, but should not, in my humble opinion, be necessary. So what was the original question?
What do we need to know about you, like to understand the artist that you are today?
Yeah, so I think, I guess I'll begin by, if I have any strength or any natural talent, it is a willingness to chase my curiosity. I'm insatiably curious. I have been since I was a child. I've always had a deep connection to what's in there, what's behind that, what's going on here. Now, academically, that did not always apply, to what we may have been studying or what I should have been retaining,
Yeah.
in school. But I think that one of the things I love about being an artist is that I get to decide which, proverbial thread that I pull, and which vein of the many that sort of present themselves, while I'm in the studio, while I'm working, or while I'm just thinking about kind of what's coming next, may emerge. So I think that everything that I do, if I was to just make a simple statement, everything that I do in the studio, everything that I'm making is a product of just chasing that insatiable curiosity to figure out what's next, what's possible. To me, I'm successful in the studio when the line between what if and why not is as short as possible. Because I think as people, for example, what if I change any number of the variables in my process? So I know we'll talk about process, in a little bit here, but I'm using a lot of different tools, water, heat, pressure, friction, number of different things. And any one of those variables, if changed even a little bit, or the sequence of when those different steps are applied, can have a dramatic change or impact, I should say, on how the work or what that particular session produces. Mm-hmm. And so when I have that thought of, what if I try to not censor myself, because I think it's the human nature is, especially as grown-ups, as adults who are presenting as though we know what's going on, or we, know what we're doing. The tendency is to censor ourselves and go to, oh, well, that's not how I do it, or that's not how I've done it before, or my plan was to do this, so I better stay on track,
Yeah.
So for me, I've just found that I'm at my best when I can shorten that line between what if and, hey, why not? I think about everything that I'm working on as an experiment that could absolutely produce a finished piece. But either way, I'm going to learn something. I'm going to put an idea forward, or have a flood of new ideas present themselves that I then get to chase in, future sessions.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like we do waste a lot of time in the decision-making process.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So shortening that and just going for it and going, well, there are no mistakes. There's only lessons. So let's go for it anyway, because I'm never going to fail. Yeah. I love
and
that.
I found that requires a degree of acceptance and willingness for what's in front of me to not work. The safest path to produce something that looks good in the moment is to do what we've already done, right? I know the recipe, I know the steps, I know with a fair amount of certainty what A, B, or C is going to produce. So let me just stick with that. And if the only goal is to feel, I guess, good at the end of the day, like, hey, I made something that looks good or looks close to what I was going for, that's a pretty safe way to play it. But I think that, again, for me, I'm way more interested in what can this session teach me that I can then carry forward, that will inevitably over time open up a whole host of new doors and veins of possibility.
Yeah. Nice. I've got so many questions about that, and we'll touch back on that. But for those who are listening today, so we're broadcasting, we'll be putting this on YouTube, but also through our podcast. For those that may not have never seen your work before and are listening to it, how would you describe your work?
I make sculptural wall art out of repurposed material. That's the shortest I can get to. Now, I am working on a body of work that will be fully sculptural. I guess I haven't really shared that publicly yet, but that's coming. It's only been it's been a matter of time. I mean, if you look at my work, you can see like it's been waiting to jump off the wall for quite a while. But I've always loved, texture and depth, and most of my work explores the relationship between layers, and what texture can do when it interacts with light. That's one of the things that is both fun and really exciting for me when people can see my work in person and they can change their vantage point. They can turn on the lights or change the source of light. It's going to have a very dramatic impact on how the piece, sort of presents. Yes. It's extremely frustrating when I'm trying to photograph it or trying to communicate it in a still image. But I've kind of, I've made peace with that. But yes, it's all a version of, texture and the combination of materials. So when I say repurposed material, the majority of what I use is industrial waste. So everything from, billboard tarps to yard signs to, I don't know what you call it in Australia, HVAC, heating, venting, air conditioning, steel, the thing that makes the space hot or cold, depending on our preference. Yes. I've really gotten into metal casting lately. So I've been using a lot of copper. I use old packing crates, packing plastic, really nothing's off limits. If I can find a use for it, I'm going to at least play with it. Now, most of what I experiment with does not work and just ends up in the pile. But the beautiful thing about experimenting with trash is that the worst case scenario is it ends up being what it was when I found it. So most of my material is sourced either through, companies or contractors that produce the same type of waste, or just from driving around and looking for mostly construction site dumpsters. I found, just for example, I had a great score the other day. I saw a roof being replaced at a business, and it's a flat roof. So they were dumping off these huge sections of steel. And so I got some pretty, puzzled looks from the construction crew as I backed my truck up to the dumpster and was just pulling things out and, strapping it down. But my antenna is always up for new materials and new opportunities to play with and see what it can produce.
Yeah. I like that you said that, the companies that are producing these waste on bulk as well, because if you do find that material that you love, it's like a free art store, right?
100%.
Yeah. So you can keep working with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
As you were talking there, I wanted to show some of your images, but I didn't want to interrupt your flow. Just so people can visually get a feel for it. I've got some images loaded here that I'm just going to flick through fairly quickly, Nathan, just so people can get a feel for the type of work that you're doing. This is metal casting, I believe. It's
That's a combination. Yeah, that's actually a good one to explain a little bit. That's a combination of billboard tarp on the side, packing plastic and resin. Yeah. And that has been melted, cooked, sanded down. The center portion that appears to be clear is a different type of resin that can be cast a bit deeper. And in that center sort of vein there is copper, part of which has a sort of, teal patina on it. Part of it is still, fresh, exposed, shiny copper. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. I've seen some reels on your Instagram, which is very generous and amazing, well produced. And it shows some of your process of pouring that metal. It looks dangerous, but really fun.
It's incredibly fun. I will tell you, the first time that I decided I was going to try that. I mean, there's some experiments that I can just try based on what I've got laying around. And then other things that just, I get an idea and I'm just like, all right, I gotta invest some time and a little bit of money in the material. So the money that I save on, canvas and paint, if I was, using more traditional mediums where one would have to purchase said supplies from a proper art store, I spend at least that much on tools, so the smelting equipment, for example. But the very first day that, I took a solid metal into a liquid form, poured it into a mold and watched it. I mean, it's very, very addicting. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll never forget the day we work with a beautiful artist called Harriet Goodall, and she's a contemporary basket weaver. but there was huge fires in Australia back in 2019, and there was an old car yard, and all the aluminium from the cars had melted out onto the ground, and she'd gone out and collected it, and it's in her studio. I'm not sure if she's used it at this point,
Wow.
but yeah, the melting of aluminium and just the organic nature, the shapes that it produces, you can't predict that.
Right.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's well, and that actually speaks to something that I've really come to embrace, which is sort of that dance that I think that all artists have between, chaos and control, right? But it's really opening up the, I guess just the possibility for some of those happy accidents. You mentioned some of the reels and process videos that I share from time to time. People, my primary reason for recording those is to capture and be able to recreate when something happens that I wasn't expecting, that I would like to explore further and actually, reproduce version of going forward. So a lot of those reels are reminders to me. In fact, just even as I watch old ones, I'm like, oh, you know what? Now that I have this thing, this tool or this process figured out, I could reapply that to this thing over here. So a lot of it is just logging and sort of like studying the process, from a somewhat scientific perspective of, all right, which variable are we going to, change, and which ones just sort of presented themselves by case of happy accident or just doing it wrong. I use a lot of industrial, like construction type tools. Very rarely do I use them for their intended, purpose. So a lot of it is just figuring out like, oh, what can this do? What mark will this make? What effect will this have on the material? And if it's something that I like, that I really want to explore further, I've got a little tutorial for myself to, because I'm not inclined. It's pretty difficult to sit and, take notes when you're heating up, metal to whatever, a couple thousand degrees Fahrenheit, and you know what I mean? So the video is helpful for that, definitely.
And I'd imagine it's a different mindset as well. Like when you're in that creative flow, like maybe you're using a different part of your brain as well. But you did post a video where I think you were revisiting a gallery that you had a show at, and you were with your notebook, and you said like you're revisiting old friends, and you were there and you were really very intently writing down and what looked like journaling. Is that something that you do often as well? Like write
Definitely.
down where
it is. Yeah, it's a balance. It's sort of a back and forth between letting it flow and just going in the moment, but also taking a lot of time to step back and sit with the work and listen. Sometimes to completed finished work, but more often to the work that is in some version of process. Another one of my art heroes is Leonardo Drew. Ty and I on the podcast just did an episode, a couple episodes on him recently. And he calls it the 7 crying babies. He says, I always have 7 crying babies, at least 7 pieces, that are in process. And so it's not a matter of, oh, what am I going to do today? It's which one's crying the loudest and is begging for attention. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
But in that sort of relationship that we build with the work, if I'm not listening, I'm not going to hear who's crying, right? If I go in and say, this is what I'm doing today, and here we go, and you're the one, it's not going to go very well. And I've done that. I can, and I'll probably make that mistake again before the week is over. It's something that I consistently forget to do. Is I have my plan, but come into the studio and look at. I always have at least, probably somewhere between 6 and 12 pieces that are like I'm actively working on, but another 20 or 30 or 40 that are sort of in timeout or just hanging out and waiting for the right time. And sometimes as I'm listening, as I'm sitting, as is part of my practice in the morning, sit with the work, journal, write down any number of things that I could do, but it's listening, it's responding to, it's really engaging in that relationship that we have with our work to give it what it needs as opposed to what I think it needs, because I'm probably going to be wrong,
Yeah. It's interesting that, isn't it? Looking behind you, this looks like a little bit of a gallery space here. I'm assuming that's not your studio, but it may be.
It's a part of my studio. Yeah. So this is kind of a gallery type area where if I have studio visits or collectors come by, I'll hang work. There's just a couple
Yes.
pieces that are just leaning up against the wall at the moment. And then where I spend the majority of my time is in back, which is basically just an industrial warehouse with
Yes.
whatever 25-foot ceilings and raw cement floors that have all
Nice.
variety of damage done to them, mostly by me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I imagine when you're working, you seem like quite a controlled and organized person, which is fantastic. And then your artwork and your process is almost like a direct, I don't want to say contradiction to that, but it's a contrast.
Sure.
It's a contrast, right? So when you're working, like, what does it look like? Is it chaotic? Is it messy? Is it like all over the place? Or is it still quite refined in the sense that, you know, we're not looking at Leonardo Drew and he's like, he's almost engulfed with his artwork in some of those images, right?
I couldn't operate in that type of chaos. It's funny. So I'll share a story. I had an artist friend come and visit the studio for the first time, and they said, I cannot believe how organized your space is, because I've got labels on everything. A lot of it too is I've got so many different types of materials and tools and different things like that. So, and I said, listen, if I had a more organized mind, I wouldn't need to do this. Like, all of the organization and sort of methodical nature is a response to the limitations that I have in terms of my cognitive ability to process things or, know where everything is. So I wouldn't describe myself as an inherently organized person, but it's just a necessary sort of response to, just my limitations. Like, in the moment, I want to be able to just flow. I want to be able to know, oh, where's my heat gun? Where's my grinder? Where's this carving tool? And so knowing where everything is and having it all laid out allows me to, when something does pop to mind, I know where it is. I can go grab it and I can stay in flow, as opposed to having to sort of set everything out in advance, for the day, if that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, you've set up systems and processes that allow you freedom.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, fantastic. I love it. You've said in the past, like, anything that makes a mark is a tool, and anything that holds a mark is a material, which is fantastic. When did you first embrace this openness towards materials and materiality?
That's a good question. I think so. When I first started making art, I was, putting traditional paint on traditional canvas, and it wasn't long before I started to want to really, sand things down. I started gently, and then I started, carving and making. And, anybody who understands how canvas works knows you can't really do that much before you're going to puncture the canvas. And that's a problem. So then I moved to wood panels, which gave me more flexibility in being able to, attach more material to it and carve into it. And so that was kind of my gateway into just using the raw material itself. And so some of my pieces, it's kind of a chicken or egg relationship. Some of them, I've got a master woodworker who makes my frames for me. And so he's also an engineer. And so I'll say, all right, Dean, here's what I'm thinking. And he'll make me, the frame, he'll make the bones of it. He'll help me to establish the relationship between the inner and the outer layer. And so then I'll work on those pieces. But what I've been moving towards more over the last couple of years is a more free and open way of working on the elements, and then retroactively figuring out how they're going to exist in space. Are they going to be framed? Are they going to hang, free without a proper, 490-degree angle orientation? Yeah. So that's actually a good one. That's a good example of a scroll series that is ongoing. But this is when I really fell in love with the billboard tarp. So billboards, as far as I can tell from the travels that I've done, exist everywhere, different versions of, advertisements. And so when those are expired, or when that ad campaign isn't going anymore, they pull them down, and it's extremely rugged, durable material. I mean, it's made to stand up to, all of the elements and be outside for, weeks, months at a time. And so when I started experimenting with that really opened up some interesting doors. And that was one of the first things that took me outside of the sort of, standard square or rectangular, profile. But each of these, like that one, for example, that's one of my favorite scrolls. The relationship between, there's about an inch or so of separation between the inner and the outer layer. And so the inner layer hangs on wood, and then the outer layer kind of hangs free that sort of, bar at the top.
Yeah. There's a delicacy to it as well, as I'm looking at it, through the light part on the left, my right-hand side. It almost looks like soft silk drapes, or organic drapes. Like, it almost feels like there's a transparency to it, which is a great contrast.
Thank you. That's lovely to hear. Yeah, I really do enjoy trying to highlight the delicacy, and a lot of it is freezing moments in time. Everything is sealed in I shouldn't say everything, but almost everything that I make is sealed in multiple coats of resin. So it's pretty bulletproof. I'm going to do a show at some point that's called "Please Touch the Artwork," because everything I make, you can tap at it, you can poke at it, you can view it without opening your eyes. But that allows me to sort of freeze moments in time that would otherwise continue degrading or would be very, very temporary, and not able to be, transported or even, look the same over time. Yeah.
You could shoot the artwork like Nikki de Saint Phal.
I could. I could. Don't think it's not on the list of maybes.
It's on the list. Yeah. Have you ever buried any of your work to see how it would degrade in nature?
I haven't buried it. My version of weathering, off in terms of just letting time and the elements do their best, is I will set things outside, and I will intentionally expose it to water and drying. So like some of the things that I use, I really enjoy using, like I mentioned before, packing crates, which is made with the cheapest possible wood that you can get away with to get a crate from point A to point B. It's not a quality wood. It's actually a combination of a lot of just garbage that is pressed and glued together, just to hold a crate together, or the course of one, maybe two trips. But after that, it's very predisposed to warping, and then the layers starting to come apart. So I'm pragmatic, or you could say, I suppose, lazy in that regard. I want to see how much of that can already be facilitated before I start to, get after it. So I haven't buried things yet, although I've had a couple of artists reach out and mention that they've done that, but I will expose it and leave it outside. And like I've got a rain spout that's outside my studio in the space that I'm in. And so I'll set different pieces right where the rain comes down, to intentionally kind of, expose it over time. I also use a lot of heat. So could be burning or melting, which is obviously a very fast way to get material to degrade in a lot of interesting ways.
Yeah. We've been talking a lot about your techniques and things like that, and and your materials. I'd love to share a couple of your reels with people now. And for those watching, you can enjoy it. And for those listening on the podcast, just have a listen to the sounds of Nathan's studio. It's pretty magnificent, if I do say so myself. It sounds more like a workshop. So let's play those now. Nice. So good, Nathan.
That was a lot. There's a lot there. So for your audio only listeners who aren't going to go on the YouTube, all of those reels are on my Instagram as well. So
yeah. Fantastic. What I loved about that as well was seeing and hearing you use big, massive tools, but then also come in with intricate tools that look like almost dentistry tools.
They are, in fact, dentistry tools. Yeah.
They are, right.
Yeah.
Why is that important to your process to work, to come back in and refine with minute details?
It is important. Why is it important? It's a great question. I think it comes down to the type of relationship that I want to have with the material and with the work, So if I was to make a very sort of broad generalization around, category A being the big, loud, messy moves. What's not pictured in any of these videos is what we had spoken about before, which is me sitting with my dog in my lap. Where'd he go? There he is. My creative director, Leo, my dog, sitting in my lap with my journal, just writing and listening. It's funny. I get a version of this comment quite a bit. Oh, I wish I could just come watch you in the studio someday. And my response is, I promise you, it's not as exciting as a highlight reel from, a month's worth of work, boiled down to 30 seconds. A lot of it is the sitting. And so what happens, and to your question about the delicate part, that's where I really enjoy sort of almost examining the big marks, the big moves, the messy things up close, and then making some of those little micro adjustments, deciding what stays and what goes. A lot of, what we just looked at is, the process of building up layers, but it's also the process of, breaking them down, carving them down, cutting them down, sanding them down, melting them down. I think about material as I want to get down to its essence. I want to give old material a new voice and communicate things that wouldn't be communicated if I was purely just using, found objects. I really enjoy work by other artists that is found, that would fall in that category of found object art. But I have this compulsion to, I feel like I have to change it in some significant ways. Like, I really like for people to be surprised when they hear what it's made of, and for it to not be obvious from a distance, or even up close for that matter, what it was before, if that makes sense. And so a lot of those sort of, smaller moves are some of the more, I guess, intimate moments with the work where I'm sort of making those. Some of those are for the most part, final decisions around, with the scalpel, with those dentistry tools, pulling away some of those finer points, sometimes, adding some small details as well. But both are very important. I guess I can't say why. Maybe I answered your question, maybe I didn't, but I think I talked about it for a little bit anyway.
I think you did. And you did mention something. I was watching an interview that you had at Benjamin Eck in Munich, and you spoke about Mark Bradford's work, which is one of your, I guess, heroes.
Absolutely.
And you said something interesting about his work. You said his work works at scale, but you could also crop in to any little minute detail and it still works. That's right. His attention to detail in that sense is monumental when you look at his work. So I think maybe that's where, the work has to work when you're in a gallery and you're standing here, and then it also has to work and it has to invite people in.
Yes.
So to do that, like working with those intricate tools and those things and getting in really close. I mean, you could get stuck, you could get lost there as a creator, I think, as well. And a lot of people do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just at so since that interview, that was a show in Munich that was earlier this year, but I suppose it was maybe a month or so ago. I was in LA visiting my brother, and I think it was at LACMA. There's a Bradford piece. There's my favorite Bradford piece is actually at the Broad in Los Angeles, or at least the favorite one that I've seen in person. But I was having this conversation with my brother around to what you just said, from 50 feet away, this works and looks amazing. and from 10 feet away and from 10 inches away, right up close.
Yes.
You could literally crop hundreds of different, images that would stand on their own, if they had to. And that to me is, I think a lot about investigation. I think a lot about, I want for my work to be an invitation to come closer, to really sit with and consider what else is here, and that kind of speaks to, you asked about me personally. That kind of speaks to, I guess, my approach to trying to evolve as a human being, and thinking about how, for me, and I think most of the people who I've had this conversation with, most of the significant growth that we experience happens as a result of pain. Purpose comes from pain. Beauty comes from scars. The most challenging situations that we would not choose to go through often produce some of the most significant growth, in us as people. And so that's a big, I guess, a big part of my work, just from a purely aesthetic standpoint, is I want to invite the viewer to come closer and really examine, what's there. To me, the work is successful. It does both of those things.
And thinking about it from like a human perspective as well, like I feel like your work invites us to look a bit closer and to excavate what's happening like in us as well. So, you talk about transformation and scars. So looking at the work and you're revealing what's underneath, but often we don't take time as humans to really sit with ourselves and to think and
right.
So it's nice that your work can give people that opportunity if that's what they choose to take away from it, because I'm assuming, we can't enforce meaning upon people with our art.
Right.
And you mentioned that at the beginning about reading the didactic panels and things like that. You really don't want that for yourself or potentially for your viewers. So for you, what do you hope people take away from your work when they see it?
I mean, I think you nailed it. I appreciate that you definitely did some homework. I think, that invitation is really, really important to me. I think that I wish I could attribute this properly, but one of a quote that I came across recently is, all art is a mirror. In other words, I don't have to explain that quote. It makes sense at face value, but we're going to see what's going to be reflected back to us is what we bring to it, And so I think that if I really consider, that invitation, like it's hard, these are some hard conversations to have with ourselves around, how do I put this? Am I serving the purpose? Am I doing what I was put here to do? Am I getting closer to who I could be, to how I could, make more of an impact in the lives of others? If that's, an ethos that's important to somebody, fill in the blank with whatever a person's, goals or objectives or sort of life view is. But, that's a really difficult question to ask, especially if we're being, honest with themselves, because, the answer that I come up with more often than not is, well, kind of, or no. And that's an uncomfortable thing to sit with, especially when the follow-up question that naturally ought to come if one is living a version of an introspective, life, which is, well, now what? What do I do about it? How can I reconsider, how I'm approaching this thing, whatever this, might be. A big part of my sort of, I don't know, I guess what really shaped me as an adult is I'm a recovering addict. I'm 23 years sober now. And so having, almost lost my life and or my freedom to drugs specifically, I've really had to, that was for me a very seminal moment in my life or period in my life that required me to really take a good hard look at, hey, is this how you want this to go?
Mm.
looking into the future, seeing where this is going, seeing where it's already taken you, is this the path that you want to stay on? And so one of the big things in the recovery space, and this is not the only place where this exists, but especially in sort of the programming for the good that I've received, the reprogramming that I've undergone, really has that perspective shift of awareness and action and accountability. But it all starts with awareness. It all starts with sitting with and really sort of taking that third party objective view of what are we doing here, and that's a big part of sort of what has formed my approach to material as well. It's interesting. This is not something that I set out to do. This is something that the work presented to me and sort of communicated to me after some time. But what I aspire to do with material, taking things that are discarded, written off, forgotten, dismissed as, ugly or broken or, trash, to show the beauty in that brokenness. And one of the things that I absolutely love and try to spend as much time as I can reading about and trying to understand is the sort of the Japanese aesthetic or philosophy of wabi-sabi, which is finding, beauty in the things that are degrading, the beauty in what's broken, and how it's better, not in spite of what it's been through, but because of what it's been through.
Yeah, exactly. And that impermanence of it as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Just because you were there once, your past doesn't define who you are now. You can change your future.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Just like a bad bit of art, it doesn't have to stay bad. You just keep working at it, right?
That's it. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think the work that you've done on yourself, but then also to help others in that space as well is really great. I know you've said in the past that if someone is struggling with addiction and you want them to know, you've said that if someone is struggling with addiction, you want them to know there is hope.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If there was someone out there listening today who was struggling, or maybe has a loved one that is struggling, what would you want to say to them now?
I mean, every situation's different and every situation is very similar, so I guess when I guess put out that invitation, I've had some lovely interactions with people, mostly on Instagram. And I just say, feel free to reach out, anytime there's an opportunity to help any way that I can, point a person in a direction, or especially if it is a loved one, give them some understanding and some context for what that person is going through. I'm always happy to do it.
Yeah. In your work, some people might say that has a dark and heavy feel, but then we talk about like transformation and there's a lot of hope there. And how do you balance those two energies in your work? Like, is it a conscious thing when you're creating?
Not if I can help it.
Yeah.
I mean, this gets back to that whole idea of, I'm actively trying to remove as much self as I can from the process and from the work, while also acknowledging that all art is autobiographical, so it is something that I definitely think about. I try not to think about it while I'm making the work, I mean, I think that I've got a pretty simple definition of let me back up. A book that came out a couple of years ago. I'm sure a lot of your listeners have heard of it or read it, but Rick Rubin's The Creative Act is such a phenomenal. Have you read it yourself?
I'm about halfway through. I collect a lot of books and read some of them. Right.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, books are just kind of like trophies, or you're like, people just assume you've read them. You're like, yeah, totally. I read all those cover to cover. Yeah. It's a phenomenal book. And one of the things that I think he does an extraordinary job of is really explaining and giving context for the relationship that the artist, the creator, can have, or I don't want to use the word should have, with the work itself. But something that that book really put a fine point on for me was it's none of my business what people think of it. It's not really my concern, who's going to like it, or, I think that the less that the fewer voices that can be in the room, while I'm creating, the better. And so I really try not to think about how it's going to be received or what it's going to be, how it's going to be interpreted. But I definitely do want for both of those energies to be in the work. I'd love for the work to be interpreted as not being, completely, dark, but to actually have some, to show the hope and the other side of it as well. Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to share a story, but it's not that interesting. Go ahead.
What does it feel like for you when a piece finally reveals itself to you? Is it more of a discovery or is it a letting go?
Well, it's both. It's I suppose it would be a discovery that it's time to let go. That's really what it is. I mean, I love that's one of the things that I'm addicted to when it comes to art, that I absolutely am chasing, is that sense of discovery, that moment of like, oh, wow, look at that, and I think that that's certainly a part of why I'm drawn to, non-representational abstract work, is because part of it's just my ADHD, and I would not have the patience to, sit down and do like, all right, I'm going to make this portrait. And if I'm successful, it's going to look close to what I intended for it to look like when I started. I've got a tremendous amount of respect for people that are able to do that. I'm just not one of them, so that discovery is a big part of what I'm after. And that, willingness to let go of, what I had in mind or where I thought it was going to go, and just be at peace with whichever direction it takes, and I think the more that I do it and the more that I sit with that, the better I become at realizing when it's time to just, stop and listen, and it's complete. Yeah. It's time to finish that and move on to the next one. Yeah.
Nice. I have to ask though, is there any point, and it doesn't matter if there is or there isn't, I'm just curious, like, do the design elements and principles come to mind? Do you think about composition? Do you think about unity? Are you thinking about balance, harmony, contrast? Are you thinking about all of those things at any one time? Or I'm assuming that maybe at the end, but are they conscious for you, or something that you discover after?
It's more of a subconscious sort of undercurrent that's always there. I mean, there are certain, obviously, visual and aesthetic principles that, are there exist for a reason, but I try to avoid any version of sort of engineering or manufacturing an intended result. That being said, that's a big part of the later phases of the work, is deciding, what serves the greater good of the piece, and what's just a little moment or something that I love on its own, and I might snap a little, macro photograph of, but if it doesn't serve the work as a whole, then it's got to go. One of my mantras in the studio is kill your darlings. I got that from a book by Stephen King, the only book by Stephen King that I've read, but it's called On Writing. And he does a magnificent job of explaining the editing process from an author's perspective. But he frames it in a way where, there might be a scene or a character in his case, in a novel that he's absolutely in love with. But if it doesn't bring unity, if it doesn't serve the overall purpose of, in this case, the work, the book, then it's got to go, And so I think about that visually as well, where, if it's not working, overall, it's just gotta be set aside and save for the next one, or maybe it comes back another way, another time.
Yeah. I love that. Kill your darlings. I think I've heard that before, but I never knew where it stemmed from. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
I want to help people out there that might be holding on to precious materials for that special project, or might have an idea that the timing's not quite right, or they're just, they don't have enough time, or they don't have enough space, or there's, I don't want to say excuses, but there's potentially, they think, reasons why they can't make this idea happen.
Right.
Have you been in that place? And if you have, what advice would you give to someone who's kind of stuck in the perfectionist realm?
So hopefully this makes sense. I try to live with one foot in two different worlds. One being, if this was, well, let me start with this. I think I got another 50 or 60 years left in me, to make work. That's my hope.
Yeah.
So that's camp number one. But I also try to spend time and acknowledge, like, the next thing that I make could be the last thing that I make.
Yeah.
So why wait? Why save it? You know what I mean? Now, if we're talking about a proper precious material where there's only one of them, and it's this, gorgeous piece of driftwood that we got on this trip, and this is the only one of its kind, I get it. I mean, I understand that, all right, there's only one of these. And so I want to do right by it. But I think that there's always a free or almost free sort of scaled down version of that thing that one could at least apply to trying to at least explore what executing with that thing, or turning that into something that they decide is going to be complete at some point, could actually be. So for me, I really try to live in that space of, I don't know if I get to make, 10,000 more pieces in my lifetime, or if I've already made my last, you know what I mean? And just that acknowledgement of, we don't, tomorrow's not promised to any of us. And so I try not to, hold on to anything, nothing's precious, a lot of things are, but material, is not, it's very temporary, so that's the way that I think about it anyway.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, you're planning to be here and creating for the next 50 to 60 years, but also could all go tomorrow.
That's right.
It's a nice way to think of things. Definitely. What about, you've touched on this a little bit, but I just thinking about people who are listening, and maybe I wrote in brackets asking for a friend, because I'm a little disorganized and scattered at times.
I wouldn't have guessed it. You seem to be on top of it. You're hiding it well, let me just say.
I've got good people around me. But what tips would you share with artists who feel a bit scattered or struggle with time management? You've spoken about, and then I want to talk about after that, about how you set up the right conditions for your art making. So you've touched on organization and labeling things and things like that, but also rituals or habits or getting into the flow. So The first thing is time management. I feel like from my dealings with you, very efficient in that way. So what are some tips there for people that might be a bit scattered and want to find more time for making? And then the second follow-up question is, do you have rituals or habits to get in the flow?
Yeah. So from a finding more time standpoint, I begin with really taking a scalpel to one's schedule and doing a full audit on where and I'm putting myself in this boat as well, where we're spending our time and where we are potentially wasting our time. Now I have the luxury of being in my studio, some weeks 40, 50, 60 hours that I'm very aware that that's a luxury that I'm extremely grateful for, that not everybody has. But even if it's a matter of, gosh, I can find 2 hours, on a weekend, what if I could get that to 4, or what if I could get that to 6? I would start with, what are the non-essential things that we are, spending our time on, and this kind of comes back to how one thinks about their artistic journey. And I mean, I hate to say it so directly and brutally, but like, is it really important to you? Is it a burning desire, or is it a, hey, that would be nice sort of wish, And I think that especially if a person's going to be, committing a portion of their life and their available reserve of energy and resources to making art, that's a really important question to ask, is how much do you really want it? whatever it looks like, so that also brings us back to beginning with like, what is your definition of success, in the art space, and it can be anything, but that has to be, beginning with the end in mind. That has to be sort of our North Star and our compass to be able to then reverse engineer back. All right, what's it going to take, to do that? I have set aside a number of hobbies that I really enjoy doing, but they just don't serve what I believe is my highest calling. I used to golf, for example. I still do once every other year or so. If I'm with friends, if I'm in a place where that's what people are doing, like I'll go do that. But it's something where if I have to decide, today between dedicating, but by the time I leave and come back, whatever, 4, 5, 6 hours to a round of golf, or that same amount of time in the studio, I'm picking the studio, every single time. So again, not right or wrong. It's just how I choose to apply, my values and my priorities to, how I spend my time. So one of the easiest things is just looking at, the screen time, how much time am I wasting, scrolling away or watching Netflix or, whatever it might be. There's a time for that. I do relax some, but, but it's intentional. You know what I mean? So that's kind of a simple thing.
And I was going to say your family and friends most likely saw a transition in you as well when you prioritized your art and your art practice and became a professional artist too. So at times you have to, maybe some people aren't on that journey with you. So maybe you need to let go of what's not serving you, and not everyone's going to be on the same path. So
of course,
understand.
Absolutely.
Another thing I love about you and how you speak about your work as well is you actually call it the work. It's the work. It's not playtime. It's not this. It's like I'm doing the work. And I think how we put language around what we're doing also helps elevate it from a level of prioritization in our minds.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that, any reasonable definition of a professional involves, doing the things that we may not want to do in order to, get a result or chase an outcome that we're after. And again, that can be any result or any outcome that is true for that individual. But if our actions don't match our goals, then that's a conversation that we need to have with ourselves, So you had mentioned, conditions. I think this is a piece of advice when people ask for it. Again, I've got the luxury of a studio space where I can have, dozens of different works in progress going at a time. That's a tremendous luxury. I think one of the most valuable tips that I could give anybody, I picked this up from one of my favorite books called Catching the Big Fish by David Lynch. And he talks in that book, it's a tremendous book by just a beautiful human being. He talks about primarily the thrust of that book is, thinking about, he was a dedicated, practitioner of meditation, but how ideas and inspiration comes, from having a practice that allows one to receive, those ideas. But one of the more tactical tips that he shares in that book is having a setup, is what he calls it. He says you have to have a setup. So even if that is just whatever your medium is, whatever your discipline is, having a space, maybe it's just a bin, where you're working on your kitchen table or whatever space you have available. But the shorter the path between, hey, I have some time or I have an idea, and being able to execute on what that is, the better. Because the more friction there is between, I could just sit and watch a show, or I could just, maybe work on my art a little bit. The shorter, the less friction there is, the higher the likelihood that some artistic action is going to take place. But to your point before about thinking about it like the work is, or as work, it's play, it's fun, it's all of those things. But I mean, if I had to sort of come up with a percentage of time when I'm working in the studio and I'm just floating and everything's just flowing and great, I mean, it's certainly less than probably 15, maybe closer to 10% of the time, which means the rest of it is just putting one foot in front of the other and not waiting for inspiration to lead to the work, but relying on the work and action and motion and touching, and moving things and making marks, that's where inspiration comes from. That's where the next thing, comes from, almost always. Now, of course, we're all absorbing different ideas and getting inspired by different things that we see, music, films, the crack in the parking lot in the window that I'm looking, all of it, But when it comes to the work, it's going to be driven by actually doing the thing and not just thinking about or waiting for that lightning bolt to strike.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's going to help so many people, Nathan. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. There's been so many gold nuggets in this conversation. You've been so generous for sharing your story and your philosophy and your work with us today. I want to remind people that they can go to your Instagram, which is just Nathan Terborg, and also your website as well to see more of your work. We'll also put a few images up in our show notes as well so people can look at it. Please follow Nathan. And of course, you have your own podcast, which is amazing, called Just Make Art with your friend. How did that come about? And what do you love about podcasting?
So Ty Nathan Clark is my co-host on the Just Make Art podcast. And I met Ty through his mentorship program. So early on, when I was just trying to, really figure out what I wanted to do and what it was going to look like, Ty does a phenomenal mentorship program, and I applied for that. And after completing that program, we just hit it off, and so we stayed in touch. He's incredibly generous with his time, and he continues to be in touch with all of his mentees and alumni that have been through the program. But I have had this idea for a while, and I've always enjoyed this. I did a podcast for another purpose before. And so I presented the idea to him, and he was all about it. And so we've really found our way and just absolutely love doing it because, I love talking about art. I love learning, I'm a lifelong, learner. So it definitely forces, it forces both of us to really, do our research and continue to self-educate. I'm completely self-taught. I don't have any formal academic education, in the arts. And so, if you're going to be self-taught, well, you better teach yourself. If you're going to take that, if you're going to say you're self-taught, it doesn't mean that you're not taught at all. It means that you're going to educate yourself on an ongoing basis about, any number of things. And so our focus with that is really breaking down and dissecting quotes and ideas from some of our favorite artists, many of them visual, but, musicians, authors, poets, film directors, all of the above, just whatever, great thinkers on the topic of making art. So a lot of things that I've talked about today, we've done deep dives in on the podcast as well. Yeah.
Nice. Fantastic. Well, we'll pop a link up to that in our notes as well, so people can head on over and watch that. I think new episodes come out twice a month, which is fantastic.
That's right.
So thank you for that. Yeah. Nathan, I've got a big hairy question for the end.
Those are my favorite kind, I think. Usually.
Yeah. Okay, great. If you could leave our listeners with one thought about art, life, even curiosity, what would that be?
I suppose it would be, don't wait. Don't wait for the perfect time. Don't wait for the perfect, technical skill or ability. Don't wait for the perfect idea. Just act, just start, I think that for me comes from a place of acknowledging that, I haven't even come close to making my best work. Not even close. And that's really exciting. And the only way that I'm going to get to where I think I'd like to be, or where I think I'm capable of, is by continuing to be in the game of making consistently, and dedicating as much of my time and energy as I can to this, while also, of course, honoring my main priorities in life, which is being, the best husband and father, that I can be. But outside of that, that's it. Don't wait. Don't wait for the perfect time. Just start and acknowledge and realize that you might not have even found your thing yet, and the only way to get as close as possible to making the best work that you're capable of is to keep exploring, is to keep trying new things. I mean, unless you're in a place where, if someone tells me, hey, I love what I'm doing. I'm just going to continue to stay on this path and make, slight incremental changes to what I'm already doing. And I love it. And this is it. Great. If you're already there, then rock and roll and Godspeed. But for the rest of us, I would say, don't camp out or don't feel like you have to spend an inordinate amount of time mastering, any particular skill or technique before continuing to try, new things and see what else is possible.
Good one. Nice one. I want to just head out to the studio now. Sorry. I want to go get making.
Let's go.
Let's go. Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Nathan. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. I hope that you get a lot of new likes and a lot of new fiber people following you that really want to experiment and push the boundaries. I know there's a lot of us out there.
I love fiber people, by the way. I mean, anytime that if my work is shared on a fiber page, I'm not a proper fiber artist, but I'd like to be. It's one of the many things that if I was to spend time on, I think I would really, truly enjoy. But it's been a joy talking to you, and I really appreciate you having me. Yeah.
You're welcome. I'm going to play an exit slideshow now, and then hang on the line. I'll say a goodbye, private goodbye.
Sure.
Thanks, Nathan.